Hey everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here with the Timeform US preview of Saturday's Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Classic. The Breeders' Cup Classic is always one of the most anticipated races of every Breeders' Cup. It's not the last race of the Breeders' Cup this year. It is race 9 on Saturday at Santa Anita, going the mile and a quarter distance for the 3 and up runners. Let's throw the field up for this race. And 13 were entered as of the time we're recording this. Only 12 will go to post. Unfortunately, Arcangelo, the Belmont and Travers winner, had to be withdrawn from the Classic due to a sore foot. He will not participate, but we do still have 12 runners signed on, Craig, and this feels like one of the more wide open Classics in recent memory.
Yeah, this may not be a race like we're used to seeing where, maybe even Horse of the Year is on the line, and maybe it could be still, but I think it's one of the better betting races we've had in the Classic in quite some time, as there is a lot of different directions you could go in here.
The number 12, Arabian Night, probably will go favored as the top 3-year-old coming into this race, but he'll be a lukewarm favorite. He's 3-1 on the morning line. And as you can see on the Timeform US pace projector, he is a horse that wants to get forward in this race. And I think 2 of the 3-year-olds are those that will be contesting the early pace, both Arabian Night from that outside post and the number 6, Saudi Crown. And Craig, I have to agree with this pace projector. It's hard to see Saudi Crown taking back being drawn inside of Arabian Night. So it does feel like those 2 will be pressing each other on the front end, and we'll see how fast they go.
Yeah, I would agree. Arabian Night would have to really outrun Saudi Crown to get in front of them before they get to the turn, even with that long run to the turn. And Saudi Crown, he's shown some real speed. When you look at his pace figures in his last couple starts, they're all 130s and 140s. So it's not like he's been setting slow paces and blue fractions. He's a real runner early.
And like the pace projector indicates, this does feel like a race that could be pretty bunched towards the middle of the pack. A lot of stalker and mid pack types. So we'll have to see how that plays out from a trip standpoint for many of the runners in this field. Let's go through this group in post position order. Arcangelo is out, of course. So the number 2, Zandon, will break from the rail. We'll take a look at his most recent victory in the Grade 2 Woodward at Aqueduct. And this was a solid effort. I wouldn't say he was beating the best field that any of these are coming out of, but he does so pretty decisively. Had a little bit of trouble around the first turn, got ranked for a second, but Flavien Prat gave him a good ride after that. And Craig, it was just good to see Zandon finally get back to the winner's circle.
Yeah, I'd just say it wasn't the strongest race that we're ever going to see. I mean, he was even money in this race without winning a race this year, but I liked what I saw from him. He's matured. He showed a more willingness to win, if you say. He's been beaten by some good horses by a lot of lengths, but this was by far his best race of the year and probably the best race we've seen from him since early in his 3-year-old season.
Craig, I think it's safe to say that if the number 3, White Abario, runs back to his Grade 1 Whitney, which we'll take a look at now, everybody else in this race might be running for second, because this was one of the most impressive dirt route performances that we've seen in any division all year, as he defeats Zandon by 6 lengths. Cody's Wish, the heavy favorite, was a distant third in this race. The question is, can he run back to it and do so going a mile and a quarter off a bit of a layoff?
Those are definitely some questions, but as you say, if he runs that 131 Timeform US speed figure that he did that day, it's his race to lose, but that's a pretty big question. The one thing I would say is it does seem to have been the plan all along. They announced, I think, right after that race that his next race would be the Breeders' Cup Classic. That said, things haven't gone all that smooth with his training schedule. He has been working well of late, so he's going to be good if he shows up and runs his race, but there's definitely some questions.
Yeah, he got a mile and an eighth last time, but you could check out that Timeform US pace figure line, that top running line there. It's ascending throughout, and he was on top of the pace that day. It doesn't have any blue color-coded fractions, but the Whitney was definitely more of a test of finishing speed than it was stamina. We'll see if it's a different story going 10 furlongs with a faster pace in this Breeders' Cup Classic. The number 4 is Missed the Cut, and we'll take a look at his past performances in Timeform US, Craig. And he's a nice horse who has done some good things over a marathon distance last time when he tried the Tokyo City at a mile and a half. Got a respectable number that day, but he's stepping up against much tougher competition now.
Yeah, his speed figures don't really stack up. I guess he has 2 things going for him. One, if the race heats up, given that he's won at longer distances, he should be coming late. And 2, his best races in the U.S. have come over the Santa Anita dirt track.
The number 5 is Derma Sotogake, who is a bit of a wild card coming into this race, just like he was a wild card coming into the Kentucky Derby. Off this performance that we're taking a look at, when he was an impressive winner of the UAE Derby all the way back in March, he showed speed this day, got to the front, and just dominated on the lead over three Japanese trained rivals who finished in behind him. And Craig, you'll remember this was a race that came up very fast relative to the Dubai World Cup on the same card. I know some speed figures that you tried to make for this night had it a very fast race. Obviously, the Kentucky Derby didn't go as planned. He hopped a bit at the start, was just always out of position that day. Maybe it's going to be a different story, but he's coming back off a layoff, missed his planned prep race in Japan due to a minor issue. Seems to be doing well now, but this is a big ask.
It is, and I do remember it well because he was my top pick in the Kentucky Derby. Didn't work out very well. I do think he had some excuses, and I think he's better than what he showed that day. But this is an awful big ask, a 6 month layoff with some interrupted training on the way to the race. It just seems like too much to ask.
And if Derma Sotogake wants to get that forwardly placed trip that he got in the UAE Derby, he could have some problems with the horse drawn right to his outside, the number 6 Saudi Crown. We'll take a look at his most recent victory in the Pennsylvania Derby. This horse is really fast, Craig, and it's hard not to see him on the early lead, given the speed with which he breaks out of the gate and just his natural high cruising speed, which was on display in this Pennsylvania Derby. I like the way he's able to respond to pressure and kick on again once Dreamlike comes to him in the stretch here. He did achieve this victory over a sloppy track. His prior runner-up finish narrowly in the Jim Dandy, also over a sloppy track, but he's run fast on fast dry going in the past. The big question with him is stamina, 10 furlongs.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely fast. You can see even in the 1 turn mile, he was setting the pace in red fractions, just blazing on the front end, nearly held off Fort Bragg that day. I do have concerns about his stamina, particularly with the way he runs. I do think he'll set the lead, as we talked about on the pace projector, but I don't think it's going to be easy. And he's game, and I do think he's a contender, but I will probably look elsewhere.
The number 7 is Clapton. He's coming off one of the lesser prep wins in the Grade 2 Lucas Classic. Got a fast pace to close into that day. You see that red color-coded pace figure for the half mile, and he was able to make a relentless run to just get up over an unlucky trademark that day. He was never really getting there too back in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, but at least he did finish decently, going the mile and a quarter distance. He just feels like he's maybe a couple of the top contenders.
Yeah, he's consistent. If anything, you can see his last 5 races are hovering a little bit above, a little bit below that 115 mark. But that 115 is a long way from the 127 race rating for this Breeders' Cup Classic.
The other Japanese horse in this race is a legitimate contender, the number 8, Ushba Tesoro. And let's take a look at his race two back when he was a winner of the Dubai World Cup back in March. And Greg, he got pace to close into this day, but he still made a relentless run from far back. He was last in the early going, went wide around that far turn over a track that it can be tough to make that move at Meydan, to take dirt in your face and pass horses like that on the outside. And he runs down a good horse in Algiers to win this race, going away at the end. Got some time off over the summer, but he did return in a prep race in Japan last time. Won it very impressively. If you watch that replay, feels like he's coming into this race in good form, seeking his 7th win in a row. And we know the distance is no problem.
No, I have no knocks on this horse at all. He's won big races. I mean, he beat some pretty decent American horses in Meydan. He got a good time form rating that day. He just seems to do everything right. And as you mentioned at Meydan, it's not like it's easy to win. We already saw Derma Sotogake won basically wire to wire that day. So it's not like the track was favoring his style. And I think he's a very serious contender.
The number 9 is Senor Buscador, another horse that will be coming from off the pace. I do wonder a little bit about whether his late run is muted somewhat, going the mile and a quarter distance, Craig. I think we saw in the Pacific Classic two back, he was making a big run around the far turn and just couldn't quite get there at the end. He is a horse that just seems to top out in those high 1 teens from a speed figure standpoint. Did get the 121 in the Pacific Classic, but was never getting to Arabian Night that day.
No, I'm a big fan of this horse. I actually saw him win the Springboard Mile in person as a 2-year-old. Things went wrong. He didn't have much of a 3-year-old campaign, and he's become a good, solid horse out in Southern California, but this just seems like a big stretch for me.
Number 10 is Dreamlike, who we did see in that Pennsylvania Derby replay behind Saudi Crown. He was the one closing at the end to finish second, well ahead of the rest of the field. That performance puts him in the mix here, Craig. The question is, where did that come from? And was it just a freakish effort on a sloppy track? Because his prior two races since returning from a layoff didn't nearly rise to that standard.
No, all I can figure, he took the blinkers off. So I'm of two minds. One, he really enjoyed that, and he's a 3-year-old who maybe is just coming into his own. We see horses make big improvements when they're three, like he did. The other thought I have is maybe he just enjoys an off track, as both of his good efforts have come on that, but on a good track and a sloppy track. But I think that last race is legit. I mean, we've already talked about Saudi Crown. I think he's a good horse. He was right there with him through the stretch, and I would not be surprised if he takes another step forward.
Going out for the same connections just to his outside is the number 11 Bright Future. Let's take a look at his most recent race in the Jockey Club Gold Cup at Saratoga, going the mile and a quarter distance. He got a very good trip this day, Craig. He was on top of the pace the entire way. It was a very moderate pace throughout. They kind of went even fractions all the way around the track, and he's able to hold off a late charge from Proxy at the end, who we'll get to in just a little bit. I thought this was a nice step forward for Bright Future, who definitely is an improving 3-year-old. He reminds some people of Vino Rosso prior to that horse coming into the Breeders' Cup Classic. And I guess you can draw some more similarities because that was not the toughest Breeders' Cup Classic on the way in either, like this one isn't. It just feels like Bright Future would need another step forward.
Yeah, his speed figures, even in that race, it didn't stack up with this field here. He did it with, as you mentioned, a pretty easy trip, tracking what was a really slow pace. He did finish off the race strongly, was able to hold off Proxy, but this is quite a step forward, and he would have to jump up a good 10 points, I would say.
Number 12 is Arabian Night, the morning line favorite in this race, and we'll take a look at his last out victory in the Grade 1 Pacific Classic. This was just the fourth start of his career. This horse is very lightly raced coming into this. He's shown a lot of talent, though. He did so early in his career, ran pretty well against tough competition, Nat Haskell, and then here beating older rivals in the Pacific Classic. Though his main rival this day was Go Rocket Ride, who unfortunately was injured and not participating in this race. The older horse division in Southern California, not the strongest. And I think he's facing a tougher field here. The good news is he handled a mile and a quarter. But Craig, given the withdrawal of Arcangelo and the way this race has come up, it does feel like he's going to be a pretty short price in a race that seems fairly wide open.
It does. And when we look at his PPs, he has 3 wins. They've all come in wire to wire fashion where he was clear early. I don't think I want to take a short price on him being able to do it from off the pace. The other option is he would have to outrun Saudi Crown for the lead, which is another thing I don't want to take a short price on. So Arabian Night's not for me. He won't shock me if he wins this race. He's obviously very talented. He's improved his speed figures every time out. But even though that Haskell was off a long layoff, and I thought he ran very well that day, it does remain that the one time he was challenged up front is the one time he wasn't able to finish off the race.
And drawn on the outside is the number 13 Proxy, a horse who's been around this handicap division for a couple of seasons now, often in the mix at the end of his races, but he hasn't gotten the top prizes that often. He is a horse, though, Craig, that does seem to relish the mile and a quarter distance, and I think you can have some confidence he'll be finishing at the end of this race. I thought he ran slightly better than Bright Future, given the way the pace played out in the Jockey Club Gold Cup last time, and I also like that he's drawn on the outside, because he's a horse that, more often than not, I think 5 times in his last 9 races, he's drawn the rail. And I don't think he's a horse that wants to get shuffled back in the early going because it takes him a while to rev up into top gear. He drew the outside when he almost won the Santa Anita Handicap earlier this year. And I like the outside post for him once again. And this does feel like the kind of Breeders' Cup Classic where something wacky could happen.
Yeah, if the pace heats up, he's definitely one. Even though he's one up near the lead, I think he prefers to be off of it. The pace hasn't been all that strong when he went to the lead. I definitely think he was better than Bright Future last time, even though he finished a nose behind that one. He does have to improve a little in the speed figure edge. He's run some 120s in the past. Feels like maybe he'll need a little more than that. But as you said, there's some others in here who probably don't want to go this far, and that's not really an issue for Proxy.
Well, as you throw up our picks for this Breeders' Cup Classic, I feel like we took similar types of horses on top, Greg. Both horses that are kind of have reputations as being bridesmaids. Zandon did get that victory last time in the Woodward. It appears to be heading in the right direction. Proxy's won a couple of nice races this year. The bottom line, though, is both of these horses are going to be prices in a race where there is a lot of uncertainty around all of the horses that are going to be in the single digits from an odds standpoint.
If you'd have told me back in the summer I was going to pick an older horse, I would have thought you were crazy because it just looked like the 3-year-olds were much better than the older horses. But for the most part, they haven't shown up here. We have a few 3-year-olds, but I really like what I saw from Zandon last time. So I'm going to take a reach with him. I think he's going to get a good setup in here. And maybe he just learned like the light went on last time when he was finally able to get the job done. And he just didn't win. I mean, he blew that field away. An admittedly weak field, but this isn't the strongest classic we're going to see. So I want to go for a price.
Yeah, I agree. I do not think this is the strongest edition of the Breeders' Cup Classic, and that's why I think a horse like the number 13 Proxy, who might fly under the radar, if he runs his A race, he's going to be in the mix at the end. And sometimes in a race like the Classic, where horses go a little too fast in the early stages, things fall apart, that could be good enough. So the number 2, Zandon for Craig, and the number 13, Proxy for me in the Breeders' Cup Classic, the feature race on Saturday at Santa Anita. Good luck if you're playing the Breeders' Cup this weekend.